The morning mist clung to the wrought-iron gates of Westbridge Academy as Maya Chen stepped off the city bus, her worn canvas bag slung across one shoulder. The prestigious boarding school stretched before her like a fortress of red brick and gleaming windows, its manicured lawns dotted with students in crisp navy blazers. She had been through this routine before: Seattle, Portland, Phoenix, each new school bringing the same hollow feeling in her chest, the same careful construction of walls around her heart. Maya's footsteps echoed against the cobblestone path as she made her way toward the main building. Her father's words from the night before still rang in her ears. "Remember, little warrior, strength isn't about the storm you can create. It's about the calm you can maintain when others try to shake you." Mr. Chen had built his life around that philosophy, teaching discipline and control in his small martial arts studio on the outskirts of town. The registration office hummed with activity as Maya collected her schedule and locker assignment. Mrs. Patterson, the aging secretary, barely glanced up from her paperwork as she handed over the necessary documents. "Locker 247, second floor. Classes begin in 20 minutes. Her tone suggested this wasn't her first interaction with a mid-semester transfer student. Navigation through Westbridge's sprawling hallways proved easier than expected. Students moved in predictable patterns, their conversations a steady murmur about weekend parties and upcoming exams. Maya found her locker nestled between a trophy display and a bulletin board covered in college recruitment flyers. As she worked the combination, spinning the silver dial with practiced ease, she became aware of a shift in the atmospheric pressure around her. The hallway had grown quieter. Victoria Sterling made her entrance like royalty arriving at court. Her platinum blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and her navy blazer fit as though it had been tailored specifically for her frame. Behind her walked two constant companions: Rachel, whose auburn curls bounced with each step, and Kate, whose sharp green eyes seemed to catalogue every detail of every person they passed. The trio moved with the confidence of those who had never questioned their place in the social hierarchy. Maya kept her focus on organizing her textbooks, but peripheral vision caught Victoria's approach. The blonde girl's designer heels clicked against the polished floor in a steady rhythm that spoke of absolute certainty in her own importance. When she finally stopped directly beside Maya's locker, the hallway fell into complete silence. "Well, well," Victoria's voice carried the practiced modulation of someone accustomed to being heard. "Fresh meat." She leaned against the adjacent locker, studying Maya with the interest of a predator evaluating potential prey. "I don't recall seeing you at orientation." "Transfer student?" Maya closed her locker with deliberate slowness, then turned to face Victoria directly. Her dark eyes met the blonde's pale blue ones without flinching. "Yes." The single word carried no emotion, no invitation for further conversation. Rachel giggled behind her hand while Kate pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over the camera function. Around them, other students had slowed their pace, sensing the beginning of what had become Victoria's daily entertainment. A few senior boys paused near the water fountain, smirking as they anticipated the show. Victoria tilted her head, studying Maya's calm expression with growing interest. Most new students either cowered or tried too hard to impress her within the first few minutes of meeting. This girl's stillness was something entirely different. "Not much of a talker, are you?" "That's fine, I prefer listeners anyway." She stepped closer, invading Maya's personal space. "Let me explain how things work here at Westbridge." But before Victoria could continue her speech, the warning bell echoed through the hallways, and Maya simply walked away. No dramatic exit, no parting words, just the quiet confidence of someone who refused to be drawn into games she hadn't chosen to play. Victoria's perfectly glossed lips parted in surprise as she watched Maya disappear into the stream of students heading to first period. Rachel and Kate exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't how these encounters typically unfolded. Maya's first class was advanced literature, taught by Mr. Davidson in a sunlit room overlooking the school's courtyard. She chose a seat in the back corner, near the windows, where she could observe without being the focus of attention. The familiar routine of note-taking and listening provided a comfortable anchor as she navigated her new environment. 15 minutes into the discussion of Shakespearean sonnets, Victoria swept into the classroom with her entourage, offering Mr. Davidson an apologetic smile that suggested lateness was a charming quirk rather than a rule violation. The teacher simply nodded and continued his lecture, clearly accustomed to this interruption. Instead of taking one of several available seats near the front, Victoria made her way directly to the back of the room. She slid into the desk beside Maya, close enough that her expensive perfume created an invisible cloud between them. Rachel and Kate settled into nearby seats, phones discreetly positioned for optimal recording angles. Maya continued taking notes as though nothing had changed, her pen moving in steady strokes across the lined paper. When Victoria leaned closer, pretending to examine Maya's handwriting, she didn't react. When Victoria began tapping her manicured nails against her desk in an irritating rhythm, Maya's expression remained unchanged. Finally, Victoria reached across the aisle and placed her hand flat against Maya's notebook, covering the words she had been writing. "Pay attention when I'm talking to you," she whispered, loud enough for the surrounding students to hear, but soft enough to avoid Mr. Davidson's attention. Maya looked up slowly, her dark eyes meeting Victoria's with unsettling calm. Without breaking eye contact, she gently moved Victoria's hand away from her notebook and continued writing. The gesture was neither aggressive nor submissive, simply a quiet assertion of her right to exist in her own space. Victoria's cheeks flushed pink with embarrassment and anger. Around them, whispers began to spread as other students recognized the unprecedented sight of someone refusing to engage with Victoria's provocations. Rachel's mouth fell open in shock, while Kate's finger hovered uncertainly over her phone screen. The rest of the class period passed in tense silence, but Maya could feel Victoria's gaze burning into her profile like a laser. When the dismissal bell rang, she gathered her materials with the same unhurried precision she had shown all morning and walked out without a backward glance. By lunchtime, word of the morning's encounter had spread throughout Westbridge Academy like wildfire. The story grew with each retelling. Some versions had Maya staring Victoria down in a battle of wills. Others claimed she had insulted Victoria in front of the entire class. By the time the tale reached the cafeteria, it had evolved into something resembling an urban legend. Maya carried her lunch tray to an empty table near the large windows that looked out over the school's athletic fields. The September afternoon sun streamed across the polished floor, creating geometric patterns of light and shadow. She had just opened her milk carton when Victoria appeared at her table. "Mind if I sit?" Victoria didn't wait for an answer before settling into the chair across from Maya, her movements graceful and deliberate. Rachel and Kate flanked her immediately, their expressions eager and predatory. Maya continued eating her sandwich without looking up. Around them, the cafeteria's ambient noise seemed to dim as other students sensed the brewing confrontation. "You know," Victoria began, her voice carrying easily to nearby tables, "I've been thinking about our conversation this morning. I realized I might have been unclear about certain expectations here at Westbridge." She paused, waiting for Maya to respond. When silence stretched between them, Victoria's smile grew sharper. "The thing is, new students usually show a bit more respect to those of us who've been here longer." Maya finally looked up, chewing thoughtfully before swallowing. "I'm listening." Victoria's laugh was bright and musical, designed to sound amused rather than mocking to any faculty members who might be observing. "Oh, you're listening. How generous of you." She leaned forward, lowering her voice to an intimate whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the nearby tables. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stand up, walk over to the trash bin, and throw away your lunch. Then you're going to come back here and apologize for being so rude to me this morning." The cafeteria had grown so quiet that the hum of the refrigeration units became audible. Students at surrounding tables had abandoned any pretense of eating their own meals, instead focusing entirely on the unfolding drama. A few had their phones out, recording discreetly. Maya set down her sandwich and studied Victoria's face for a long moment. The blonde girl's expression showed complete confidence in her own authority, the certainty of someone who had never been seriously challenged in this particular arena. Behind her, Rachel and Kate wore matching expressions of anticipation. "No," Maya said quietly. The word hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Victoria's smile faltered for just an instant before reasserting itself with renewed brightness. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "No." Maya's voice remained steady and conversational. "I'm going to finish my lunch, and then I'm going to go to my next class." Victoria's carefully constructed facade cracked visibly. Her blue eyes widened with genuine shock, and for a moment her mask of sophisticated control slipped entirely. Around them, whispers began to spread like ripples across a still pond. Did she just say no to Victoria? No one says no to Victoria Sterling. "This is going to be interesting." Victoria recovered quickly, her smile returning with predatory intensity. "You must not understand how things work here. Let me be clearer." She reached across the table and deliberately knocked over Maya's milk carton, sending white liquid spilling across Maya's tray and onto the floor. Maya watched the milk spread across the table's surface without changing expression. She stood slowly, gathered her soaked napkins, and began cleaning up the mess with methodical precision. The mundane action somehow carried more weight than any dramatic response could have achieved. "Oops," Victoria said with exaggerated innocence. "How clumsy of me." Maya finished cleaning the spill, disposed of the wet napkins, and returned to her seat. She picked up her sandwich, miraculously untouched by the milk, and took another bite. Victoria's face had grown pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. The power dynamics of the situation had shifted in a way she didn't fully understand, and the growing murmur of voices from surrounding tables suggested that other students were beginning to recognize it too. "You think you're something special," Victoria hissed, her voice losing its performative quality and becoming genuinely venomous. "But trust me, by the end of the week, you'll be begging me to let you sit at my table." Maya finished her sandwich, closed her milk carton, and stood. She looked down at Victoria for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Enjoy your lunch," she said simply, then walked away. The cafeteria erupted into excited whispers as Victoria remained seated, her face burning with embarrassment and fury. Rachel and Kate exchanged worried glances, recognizing that their leader had been publicly challenged in a way that couldn't be easily dismissed or explained away. Maya's afternoon classes passed in a blur of barely contained excitement from her fellow students. Word of the cafeteria confrontation had spread through every social circle, creating an undercurrent of anticipation that followed her through advanced chemistry and European history. Teachers continued their lessons, while students passed notes and exchanged meaningful glances. By the time the final bell rang, Maya had become the subject of intense speculation and curiosity throughout Westbridge Academy. As she gathered her books from her locker, she could feel countless eyes tracking her movements. The attention was uncomfortable, but not entirely unfamiliar. She had been the center of unwanted focus before, in Seattle, under very different circumstances. The memory of Seattle hit her without warning as she walked toward the school's main entrance. Derek Martinez, the boy whose arm she had broken in a moment of uncontrolled rage, the sound of his scream echoing through the gymnasium. The horrified faces of classmates who had previously ignored her. The way her father's expression had crumbled when the principal called to explain why Maya was being expelled. She stopped walking, pressing her back against a brick wall as the memory threatened to overwhelm her. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the straps of her bag. The philosophical discussions about control and discipline that she had shared with her father suddenly felt fragile in the face of mounting pressure and provocation. "Deep breath, little warrior," she whispered to herself, repeating the words her father used during their training sessions. "The storm passes through you, but it doesn't become you." When Maya finally made it home to the small apartment she shared with her father, she found him waiting in their tiny living room with 2 cups of green tea. Mr. Chen worked long hours at his martial arts studio, but he always made time for their evening conversations. "How was your first day?" he asked, studying her face with the perceptive eyes of someone who had spent decades reading the subtle signs of internal conflict. Maya sank into the threadbare armchair across from him and accepted the warm cup gratefully. "Complicated." Mr. Chen waited patiently while she organized her thoughts, a skill he had developed through years of teaching impatient students the value of considered reflection. "There's a girl at school," Maya began slowly. "Victoria. She seems to be used to having power over other students, and she doesn't like that I won't play her games." Her father nodded thoughtfully. "And how did you respond to her provocations?" "I stayed calm. I didn't react the way she wanted me to." Maya paused, swirling the tea in her cup. "But Dad, I could feel it. The anger, just like in Seattle before everything went wrong." Mr. Chen set down his tea and leaned forward, his expression serious. "Maya, the fact that you recognized the anger without being controlled by it shows how much you've grown. In Seattle, you were surprised by your own emotions. Today, you saw them coming and chose your response deliberately." Maya's shoulders relaxed slightly, but worry still creased her forehead. "What if she keeps pushing? What if I lose control again?" "Then you'll handle that challenge when it arrives," her father replied. "But remember, you have more tools now than you had in Seattle. You understand the difference between reacting and responding. That knowledge is your greatest weapon." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the late afternoon sun filter through their apartment's single window. Maya had inherited her father's quiet nature, but underneath the calm surface, both of them carried the intensity of water held behind a dam. "There's something else," Maya said eventually. "I think she's the type of person who will escalate until she gets the reaction she wants. And if I give her that reaction—" "You won't," Mr. Chen said with gentle certainty, "because you've learned the hardest lesson a martial artist can master. True strength is knowing when not to use the power you possess." The next morning brought an unexpected development. Maya arrived at her locker to find a small crowd of students gathered nearby, their phones displaying the same image. Someone had created a meme using a photo of Maya from the previous day's cafeteria encounter, with text that read, "When someone tries to intimidate you, but you're dead inside." The image showed Maya's calm expression as she cleaned up the spilled milk, and while the caption was clearly meant to be mocking, the comments below revealed a more complex response from her fellow students. Honestly, kind of badass, how she just ignored Victoria completely. "I wish I could stay that calm when people mess with me." Victoria looked so confused when Maya didn't react. Maya closed her locker and walked to her first class, aware that the dynamics of her situation had shifted again. What Victoria had intended as humiliation was being interpreted by many students as strength. Victoria herself was nowhere to be seen during first period, but Rachel and Kate whispered animatedly in the back row, shooting occasional glances toward Maya with expressions that mixed curiosity and calculation. During lunch, Maya chose the same isolated table as the previous day, hoping to eat in peace while she processed the morning's unexpected developments. She had just unwrapped her sandwich when a shadow fell across her table. "Is this seat taken?" Maya looked up to find a slight boy with dark hair and nervous eyes standing beside her table. She recognized him from her European history class. He typically sat alone near the front, took meticulous notes, and seemed to shrink into himself whenever called upon by the teacher. "No," Maya said, gesturing toward the empty chair. The boy settled into the seat cautiously, as though he might need to flee at any moment. "I'm David Chen," he said, then quickly added, "No relation. I know we have the same last name, but—" "It's fine," Maya interrupted gently. "I'm Maya." David nodded, unwrapping his own lunch with hands that shook slightly. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't being overheard. "What you did yesterday with Victoria, I've never seen anyone just not react to her like that." Maya studied David's face, recognizing something familiar in his expression. The careful way he held himself, the constant awareness of his surroundings, the gratitude for small acts of defiance, all signs of someone who had learned to navigate hostile territory through invisibility and endurance. "She bothers you too?" Maya asked. David's laugh was bitter and short. "Victoria Sterling has made my life miserable since 7th grade, but watching you yesterday, it was like seeing someone speak a language I didn't know existed." Before Maya could respond, the cafeteria's ambient noise shifted. Conversations quieted and chairs scraped against the floor as students turned toward the entrance. Victoria had arrived with an expanded entourage. Rachel and Kate flanked her as usual, but they were joined by Marcus Webb and Tyler Johnson, two senior boys whose presence transformed the atmosphere from anticipatory to threatening. The group moved through the cafeteria with deliberate slowness, acknowledging greetings from various tables, but maintaining clear focus on their ultimate destination. When they reached Maya's table, Victoria smiled down at her with renewed confidence. "I don't think we've been properly introduced," Victoria said, extending a manicured hand toward David. "Victoria Sterling." "And you are?" David's face had gone pale, but he managed to stammer out his name while reluctantly shaking Victoria's hand. "David Chen," Victoria repeated thoughtfully. "Any relation to our new friend here?" When David nodded, Victoria's smile grew wider. How wonderful. A family reunion. Maya felt her chest tighten as she recognized the predatory calculation in Victoria's expression. The blonde girl had identified David as a potential pressure point and was preparing to exploit it. "You know," Victoria continued, still addressing David, but speaking loud enough for surrounding tables to hear, "I've been thinking about what we discussed yesterday regarding respect and proper behavior. Maybe I wasn't clear about the consequences of antisocial attitudes." Marcus and Tyler moved to flank the table, their presence transforming what might have been a verbal exchange into something more threatening. Around them, other students continued eating, but with the hyper-awareness of prey animals sensing nearby predators. Maya stood slowly, her movement causing Victoria to take a half-step backward despite herself. "Leave him out of this," Maya said quietly. Victoria's laugh was bright and cruel. "Oh, but that's not how it works. When someone disrupts the social order, it affects everyone around them. Actions have consequences." She turned her attention back to David, whose hands were trembling visibly now. "David understands that, don't you, David?" Maya felt something cold and familiar stirring in her chest, the same ice-water rage that had consumed her in Seattle when Derek Martinez had pushed that smaller kid down the stairs. The memory of Derek's arms snapping under her grip flashed through her mind, along with the horrified screams of witnesses. She closed her eyes for a moment, hearing her father's voice. "The storm passes through you, but it doesn't become you." When she opened her eyes, Victoria was studying her face with increased interest. "There it is," Victoria said softly. "I was wondering when we'd see the real you." Maya's voice, when she spoke, was steady, but carried an undertone that made several nearby students look up from their meals. "You want to see the real me? Keep pushing." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Victoria's confidence flickered for a moment as she processed the shift in Maya's demeanor, but she quickly recovered. "Is that a threat?" Victoria asked, her voice pitched to carry to the faculty table across the cafeteria. Maya looked at David, whose face had gone completely white, then back at Victoria. She could feel the weight of dozens of phone cameras focused on this moment, recording every word and expression for immediate distribution across social media platforms. "It's information," Maya said finally. "Process it however you want." She gathered her lunch materials and walked away, leaving Victoria standing beside the table with her mouth slightly open in surprise. The cafeteria remained silent for several heartbeats before conversations resumed at a subdued volume. Maya spent the rest of lunch period in the library, trying to focus on homework while processing the morning's confrontation. She could feel the familiar tension building in her shoulders and neck, the same physical warning signs that had preceded her loss of control in Seattle. When she finally returned to the hallway for afternoon classes, she found David waiting by her locker. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I didn't mean for her to involve me. I just wanted to thank you, and now I've made everything worse." Maya opened her locker and began exchanging books for her afternoon schedule. "It's not your fault. Victoria was going to escalate regardless of what you did or didn't do. But now she knows she can get to you through other people," David said miserably. "That's how she operates. She finds your weak spots and keeps pressing until you break." Maya paused, considering his words. In her peripheral vision, she could see students passing by while shooting curious glances in their direction. The morning's encounter had clearly been dissected and analyzed by the entire student body during lunch period. "Maybe," Maya said finally, "but she's also shown me something important about herself." David frowned. "What do you mean?" Maya closed her locker and looked directly at him. "She's afraid of what happens when people don't react the way she expects. That's why she keeps escalating. She needs the drama to maintain her sense of control." That evening, Maya's phone buzzed constantly with notifications from social media platforms she rarely used. Someone had filmed the cafeteria confrontation and posted it to multiple sites where it was being shared and commented on with increasing frequency. The video quality was poor and the audio unclear, but Maya's words, "keep pushing," and its information came through clearly enough to spawn dozens of response videos and reaction posts. Some students praised her composure under pressure, while others speculated about what she might be capable of if truly provoked. Maya turned off her phone and sat with her father in their living room, sharing the day's events while they ate simple dinner of rice and vegetables. "She's trying to isolate you," Mr. Chen observed after listening to Maya's account. "By threatening your friend, she's attempting to make you feel responsible for other people's safety." Maya nodded. "And if I react to protect David, I become the aggressor in everyone's eyes. And if you don't react?" Maya was quiet for a long moment. "Then David gets hurt because of me." Mr. Chen set down his chopsticks and looked at his daughter seriously. "Maya, you cannot control Victoria's actions. You can only control your own responses. That doesn't make you responsible for her choices. but it makes me complicit if I do nothing while she hurts someone else. There's a difference between doing nothing and choosing your battles carefully, her father replied. Sometimes the most effective action appears to be inaction. Maya understood the principle intellectually, but emotionally she struggled with the idea of standing by while Victoria targeted David or other vulnerable students. The memory of Seattle complicated everything. She knew firsthand what could happen when someone pushed her past her limits, but she also remembered the guilt and isolation that followed her moment of uncontrolled violence. The next day brought a new level of intensity to Westbridge Academy's social dynamics. Maya arrived to find that the previous day's confrontation had evolved into a campus-wide talking point, complete with team loyalties and predictions about potential outcomes. Victoria had clearly spent the evening developing a more sophisticated strategy. Instead of direct confrontation, she began a campaign of subtle, psychological pressure designed to isolate Maya from potential allies while building anticipation for a more dramatic showdown. During first period, Maya found notes in her textbook, anonymous messages suggesting that she was dangerous and unstable, that other students should avoid her for their own safety. The handwriting was clearly disguised, but the expensive stationery suggested its source. Between classes, Victoria's friends began spreading carefully crafted rumors about Maya's past, mixing fragments of truth with wild speculation. They claimed she had been expelled from her previous school for violence, that her family had been forced to move repeatedly because of her behavioral problems, that she was on medication for anger management issues. Maya recognized the tactics as sophisticated and effective. By the time lunch period arrived, she could sense a shift in how other students regarded her. The curiosity and admiration of the previous day had been replaced by wariness and apprehension. She carried her tray to the same isolated table as before, but this time no one approached to join her. David sat several tables away, shooting guilty glances in her direction while clearly avoiding direct association with her. Maya ate in solitude while processing the morning's psychological assault. Victoria had demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that elevated her beyond simple school bully into something more dangerous and sophisticated. As if summoned by Maya's thoughts, Victoria appeared at the table with her usual entourage. But instead of sitting down or making demands, she simply stood there smiling, while her friends arranged themselves in a loose circle around Maya's chair. "Having a nice lunch?" Victoria asked pleasantly. Maya continued eating without looking up. Around them, the cafeteria had grown quiet, as other students recognized the beginning of another confrontation. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," Victoria continued, "about consequences and social responsibility. It occurred to me that maybe I haven't been clear enough about how things work here at Westbridge." She gestured grandly toward the surrounding tables, where dozens of students were pretending to eat while obviously listening to every word. "See, the thing about respect is that it has to be earned. And the thing about earning respect is that it requires understanding your place in the community." Victoria's voice carried easily through the quiet cafeteria. "When someone disrupts that natural order, it creates tension." Maya finally looked up, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. "Is there a point to this speech?" Victoria's smile grew sharper. "The point, dear Maya, is that your little performance yesterday has consequences beyond just our personal relationship. People are starting to ask questions about what kind of person you really are, about whether you might be dangerous." Around them, whispers began to spread as Victoria's words hit their target. Maya could feel the weight of dozens of stares, some curious, some fearful, all focused on her response. "And what have you told them?" Maya asked quietly. "Oh, I haven't told them anything," Victoria replied with exaggerated innocence. "I've simply shared my concerns about students who have histories of violence at previous schools, who might not be able to control themselves if properly motivated." Maya felt ice forming in her chest as Victoria's strategy became clear. The blonde girl had somehow discovered details about Seattle and was preparing to weaponize them against her. "Of course," Victoria continued, "I hope those concerns prove to be unfounded. I would hate for anyone to get hurt because someone couldn't manage their temper." Maya stood slowly, her movement causing several nearby students to push back from their tables instinctively. The cafeteria fell into complete silence. "You don't know anything about me," Maya said, her voice carrying despite its quiet tone. Victoria's laugh was light and musical. "Don't I?" Transfer student started mid-semester. Family moved from Seattle under mysterious circumstances. Father works at a martial arts studio, but keeps unusual hours for someone in the fitness industry. Limited social connections, defensive about personal history, and yesterday displayed clear signs of anger management issues when challenged. Each detail hit Maya like a physical blow. Victoria had clearly done extensive research, possibly even hiring someone to investigate Maya's background. The level of calculation involved suggested resources and determination that went far beyond typical high school social politics. "The question," Victoria continued, "is what we do with this information. I would prefer to handle things discreetly between us. But if you continue to disrupt the social order here at Westbridge—" She shrugged eloquently. "Well, sometimes the community has a right to know what they're dealing with." Maya looked around the cafeteria, taking in the sea of faces focused on her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She could see David watching from across the room, his expression anguished. A few faculty members had noticed the gathering crowd and were beginning to move closer. "What do you want?" Maya asked. Victoria's smile became triumphant. "A public acknowledgement of the natural order, an apology for your behavior yesterday, and a commitment to respect the social structures that make Westbridge Academy the special place it is." The request was crafted to be humiliating while appearing reasonable to any adults who might be listening. Maya would be forced to submit publicly, while Victoria could claim to be promoting school harmony and conflict resolution. Maya considered her options, while Victoria waited with obvious satisfaction. Around them, phone cameras were undoubtedly recording every moment of what appeared to be Victoria's ultimate victory. "No," Maya said simply. Victoria's expression shifted from triumph to disbelief. "I'm sorry, what?" "No, I won't apologize for refusing to be intimidated, and I won't pretend that your threats constitute any kind of legitimate social order." Maya's voice carried clearly through the silent cafeteria, and she could see surprised recognition dawning on several faces among the watching students. Victoria's carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel in real time. "You're making a mistake," Victoria said, her composure beginning to crack. "People are going to find out about Seattle one way or another. Wouldn't you prefer to control how that story gets told?" Maya felt the familiar cold rage building in her chest, but this time she recognized it early enough to use it rather than being controlled by it. She stepped closer to Victoria, close enough that her next words would be clearly audible to the watching crowd, but would appear conversational to any faculty members observing from a distance. "The story about Seattle is that I made a mistake and learned from it. The story about you is that you make mistakes and try to cover them up by hurting other people. Which story do you think people will remember?" Victoria's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. Around them, the cafeteria remained silent. But Maya could sense a shift in the crowd's energy as students began to reassess the power dynamics playing out before them. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Victoria hissed, her carefully modulated voice cracking under pressure. Neither do you, Maya replied, then walked away without looking back. The cafeteria remained frozen for several heartbeats after Maya's departure before conversations resumed at a subdued volume. Victoria stood in the middle of the circle her friends had formed, her face burning with humiliation, as she realized that her carefully orchestrated moment of triumph had become something entirely different. Maya spent the rest of lunch period in the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face while trying to process the intensity of what had just occurred. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of maintaining control, while every instinct screamed at her to respond to Victoria's threats with immediate physical action. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, seeing her father's eyes looking back at her. Mr. Chen had taught her that true strength wasn't about the ability to destroy opponents, but about the wisdom to choose when destruction was necessary and when it would only create more problems. The afternoon passed in a blur of whispered conversations and sideways glances. Maya could feel the entire school processing the cafeteria confrontation, trying to understand what they had witnessed and what it might mean for Westbridge Academy's established social order. Victoria was nowhere to be seen during Maya's afternoon classes, but her absence somehow carried more weight than her presence had. Rachel and Kate sat together in European history, shooting nervous glances toward Maya while engaging in animated, whispered conversations. When the final bell rang, Maya gathered her books and prepared for the walk home, hoping to avoid any additional confrontations. But as she approached her locker, she found David waiting for her with an expression of mixed guilt and determination. "I'm sorry about lunch," he said immediately. "I should have sat with you instead of avoiding you like everyone else." Maya opened her locker and began packing her bag. "You were protecting yourself. There's nothing wrong with that." "But there is something wrong with it," David insisted. "Victoria only has power because people like me are too scared to stand up to her. What you did today, calling her out in front of everyone, that took real courage." Maya paused in her packing, considering David's words. "It also might have made everything worse. Victoria isn't going to just forget about this." "Maybe not," David agreed. "But at least now people have seen that she can be challenged, that she's not as invincible as she pretends to be." As if summoned by their conversation, Victoria appeared at the end of the hallway. But instead of approaching with her usual entourage, she walked alone, her expression cold and determined. Students parted to let her pass, recognizing something dangerous in her posture and movement. She stopped directly in front of Maya and David, ignoring the curious stares from surrounding students. "This isn't over," she said quietly, her voice carrying a level of genuine menace that her previous theatrical performances had lacked. Maya closed her locker and faced Victoria directly. It never was. Victoria studied Maya's face for a long moment, as if trying to decode some hidden message. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Tomorrow, after school, behind the gymnasium, just you and me." The challenge hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Around them, students had stopped pretending to mind their own business and were openly staring at the two girls facing off in the middle of the hallway. Maya considered the invitation carefully. She could decline, potentially ending the immediate conflict, but leaving Victoria free to continue her psychological campaign indefinitely. Or she could accept, risking everything on a single confrontation that could either resolve the situation or destroy any chance she had of fitting in at Westbridge Academy. "Just you and me?" Maya asked. Victoria nodded. "No audience, no phones, no interference. We settle this directly." Maya thought about her father's teachings, about the difference between avoiding conflict and choosing your battles wisely. Victoria had already demonstrated her willingness to escalate indefinitely, and her research into Maya's background suggested resources and determination that could make life at Westbridge unbearable if left unchecked. "Fine," Maya said. "Tomorrow after school." Victoria's smile was sharp and predatory. "Don't disappoint me." She walked away without another word, leaving Maya and David standing in the hallway, surrounded by excited whispers and the soft clicking of phone cameras capturing the moment for immediate distribution across social media. "Are you sure about this?" David asked quietly. Maya watched Victoria disappear around the corner, already surrounded by Rachel and Kate, who had materialized as soon as the confrontation ended. "No," Maya said honestly, "but I'm sure about what happens if I don't." That evening, Maya sat with her father in their small living room, sharing tea while she recounted the day's escalating tensions. Mr. Chen listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly serious as Maya described Victoria's research into their family's background and the challenge that had been issued for the following afternoon. "She knows about Seattle," Maya said finally. "Somehow she found out about Derek and what happened at my old school." Mr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. "Information is a weapon like any other," he said eventually. "It can be used to attack or to defend, depending on who wields it and why." "What do you mean?" Her father set down his teacup and looked at her directly. "Victoria's knowledge of your past only has power if you allow it to control you. The truth about Seattle is that you made a mistake, learned from it, and became stronger. That's not a weakness, it's growth." Maya nodded, understanding the principle but struggling with its application. "But what about tomorrow? Victoria won't fight fair, and if I hurt her the way I hurt Derek..." "Then you'll deal with those consequences when they arrive," Mr. Chen said firmly. "But Maya, you're not the same person who lost control in Seattle. You've trained for 2 years to develop discipline and awareness. Trust that training." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of traffic outside their apartment window. Maya could feel her father's calm confidence surrounding her like a protective barrier, but underneath it was the familiar tension of preparation for battle. "There's something else," Maya said eventually. "Victoria mentioned that you keep unusual hours at the studio. How could she know that unless..." Mr. Chen's expression darkened. "Unless she had us investigated professionally. That level of resource suggests family wealth and connections beyond typical high school politics." The implication hung heavy between them. Victoria Sterling wasn't just a privileged teenager with a cruel streak. She was someone with access to adult resources and possibly adult guidance in her campaign against Maya. "Are you reconsidering tomorrow's meeting?" Mr. Chen asked. Maya thought about David's frightened face, about the other students who moved through Westbridge Academy's halls with the careful posture of prey animals, about the climate of fear that Victoria had created and maintained through systematic psychological abuse. "No," she said finally. "If anything, knowing how far she's willing to go makes it more important to end this now." Mr. Chen nodded approvingly. "Then we should prepare properly. Tonight, we'll review defensive techniques and situational awareness. Tomorrow, you'll be ready for whatever she brings to that gymnasium." The next day arrived with unseasonable warmth for late September, as if the universe was providing perfect conditions for confrontation. Maya moved through her morning classes with heightened awareness, noting the increased frequency of whispered conversations and sideways glances from her fellow students. Word of the after-school meeting had spread throughout Westbridge Academy overnight, transformed by social media into something approaching a scheduled entertainment event. Despite Victoria's insistence that the confrontation would be private, Maya doubted that promise would be kept. Victoria herself was nowhere to be seen during morning classes, but Rachel and Kate moved through the hallways with expressions of anticipatory excitement that suggested their leader was preparing something elaborate for the afternoon's encounter. During lunch, Maya sat alone at her usual table, but the isolation felt different than it had in previous days. Instead of the hostile exclusion she had experienced earlier in the week, students seemed to be giving her space out of respect rather than fear. A few even nodded greeting as they passed her table, subtle acknowledgements of what she represented in Westbridge's evolving social dynamics. David joined her midway through lunch period, settling into his seat with obvious nervousness. "The whole school is talking about this afternoon," he said quietly. "Victoria's been telling people that she's going to expose your violent past and prove that you're dangerous." Maya continued eating her sandwich without visible reaction, but internally she was processing the strategic implications of Victoria's narrative construction. By framing the confrontation as necessary protection of the school community, Victoria was positioning herself as a hero, regardless of the encounter's actual outcome. "What else is she saying?" Maya asked. David glanced around nervously before continuing. "That you've been threatening students, that you have a history of serious violence at previous schools, that your father is some kind of criminal who had to leave Seattle under suspicious circumstances." Each lie was carefully crafted to contain enough partial truth to be believable while distorting the overall narrative beyond recognition. Maya recognized Victoria's sophistication in understanding how information warfare worked in high school environments. "And people believe her." David's expression was conflicted. "Some do. But others remember how calm you've been all week, how you never started any of these confrontations. There are people who want Victoria to be taken down a few notches, even if they're too scared to say it openly." Maya finished her lunch while considering the political landscape she would be navigating that afternoon. Victoria had clearly spent considerable effort building support for her version of events, but Maya's consistent refusal to be provoked had created doubt in some observers' minds. The afternoon classes passed with excruciating slowness, each minute stretching toward the inevitable confrontation behind the gymnasium. Maya found herself reviewing her father's lessons about situational awareness and defensive positioning, preparing for scenarios that ranged from simple verbal intimidation to coordinated physical assault. When the final bell rang, Maya gathered her books with deliberate calm, while around her classmates erupted into excited chatter about the impending showdown. She could see groups of students making plans to position themselves where they could observe the meeting, despite Victoria's promise of privacy. Maya walked to her locker through hallways buzzing with anticipatory energy, aware that dozens of eyes were tracking her movement. She packed her bag methodically, using the routine task to center herself and focus her mental preparation. As she closed her locker, she found David waiting nearby with an expression of deep concern. "You don't have to do this," he said urgently. "You could just leave now, go home. Let Victoria claim whatever victory she wants. It's not worth getting hurt over." Maya appreciated his concern, but she also recognized the fundamental misunderstanding underlying his suggestion. This wasn't about Victoria's claims of victory. It was about whether Westbridge Academy would continue to be a place where students like David lived in constant fear of psychological and social predation. "Yes, I do have to do this," Maya said gently. "Not for me, but for everyone else who's tired of being afraid." She walked toward the school's rear exit, aware that students were discreetly following at a distance despite Victoria's insistence on privacy. Maya expected this. High school politics operated on visibility and witness testimony, and Victoria would want documentation of whatever she was planning. The area behind the gymnasium was a small courtyard surrounded by high brick walls, accessible through a narrow passage that would limit the number of observers who could position themselves with clear sight lines. Maya arrived first, using the few minutes of solitude to assess the space and identify potential tactical advantages or disadvantages. Victoria appeared exactly on schedule, walking through the passage with confident steps that echoed off the surrounding walls. She had changed from her school uniform into dark jeans and a fitted black sweater that suggested she was prepared for physical activity. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her expression carried the cold focus of someone approaching a task she had been planning meticulously. Behind her, at a discreet distance, Maya could see Rachel and Kate positioning themselves near the passage entrance, with phones discreetly ready. Despite the promise of privacy, Victoria was clearly prepared to document whatever was about to occur. The two girls faced each other in the center of the courtyard, separated by perhaps 10 feet of concrete space. Around them, Maya could sense the presence of other students, finding observation positions despite the secluded location. "I'm glad you came," Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly in the enclosed space. "I was beginning to wonder if you had any courage at all." Maya didn't respond immediately, instead taking a moment to assess Victoria's posture and positioning. The blonde girl stood with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed she held overwhelming advantages, but Maya could detect subtle signs of tension in her shoulders and hands. "What exactly are we here to settle?" Maya asked. Victoria's smile was sharp and predatory. "Whether you're going to continue disrupting the natural order at Westbridge, or whether you're going to learn your place like everyone else." "And if I refuse to learn my place?" Victoria's expression shifted, revealing something cold and calculating beneath her composed surface. "Then everyone will see exactly what kind of person you really are. The violent, unstable transfer student who attacks other students when she doesn't get her way." Maya felt the familiar ice forming in her chest as Victoria's strategy became clear. This wasn't going to be a simple confrontation, it was an elaborate setup, designed to provoke Maya into losing control while being recorded by hidden cameras. "You're going to attack me," Maya said, understanding flooding through her, "and your friends are going to film my response while claiming I started it." Victoria's smile grew wider. "Such a vivid imagination. Why would I attack you when everyone already knows you're the dangerous one?" Before Maya could respond, Victoria lunged forward with surprising speed, her hands reaching for Maya's hair and face in a flurry of scratching, pulling motions designed to cause visible damage while appearing defensive to any observers who couldn't see the attack's initiation clearly. Maya's training kicked in instinctively. She stepped back and to the side, avoiding Victoria's initial assault while maintaining her own balance. Victoria stumbled slightly, overcommitted to her attack, giving Maya a clear opportunity for a devastating counterstrike. But instead of taking advantage of Victoria's vulnerability, Maya simply moved further back, creating distance between them while keeping her hands visible and non-threatening. "Stop," Maya said clearly, her voice carrying to the hidden observers. "I don't want to fight you." Victoria recovered quickly and launched a second attack, this time aiming a wild slap at Maya's face while screaming, "Stay away from me!" in a voice pitched to suggest fear and desperation. Maya caught Victoria's wrist gently but firmly, stopping the attack without causing injury. She held Victoria's arm for just a moment, long enough to demonstrate control, before releasing it and stepping back again. "This isn't necessary," Maya said, maintaining the same calm tone. "Whatever problems you think we have can be resolved without violence." But Victoria had committed to her strategy and wasn't going to be deterred by Maya's attempts at de-escalation. She charged forward a third time, aiming what appeared to be a desperate punch at Maya's stomach, while continuing to cry out as if she were the victim of an unprovoked assault. This time, Maya's response was more decisive. She sidestepped Victoria's clumsy attack, caught the blonde girl's outstretched arm, and used Victoria's own momentum to guide her gently but firmly to the ground. Victoria landed on her knees, unhurt but clearly off balance and disoriented. Maya immediately stepped back, hands raised in a non-threatening gesture, while Victoria scrambled to her feet with fury burning in her eyes. "You're finished," Victoria hissed, abandoning her pretense of being a victim. "Everyone saw you attack me. You'll be expelled by tomorrow morning." Maya looked toward the passage where she could see Rachel and Kate holding their phones, recording everything. But she also noticed other students with their own devices, capturing the encounter from different angles that would show Victoria as the clear aggressor in each exchange. "I think they saw exactly what happened," Maya said quietly. "The question is whether you want to continue embarrassing yourself or if you're ready to have an adult conversation about how we coexist at Westbridge." Victoria's face was flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. Her carefully planned ambush had failed completely, and worse, she had been outmaneuvered in full view of multiple witnesses who would undoubtedly share their recordings throughout the school community within hours. "This isn't over," Victoria said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Yes, it is," Maya replied firmly. "It's been over since the moment you decided to research my family's background and issue threats. The only question was whether it would end with understanding or with consequences." Victoria looked around the courtyard, taking in the faces of students who had emerged from hiding to watch the conclusion of their confrontation. Many of those faces showed expressions that ranged from disappointment to disgust as they processed what they had witnessed. Maya walked toward the passage, pausing only to address the assembled observers. "Anyone who wants to discuss what happened here is welcome to compare their recordings," she said clearly. "I think you'll find them consistent in showing who initiated contact and who tried to avoid escalation." As Maya disappeared through the passage, Victoria remained standing in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by students whose phones contained video evidence of her failed deception. Rachel and Kate approached uncertainly, recognizing that their leader's reputation had sustained irreparable damage. Within an hour, multiple recordings of the gymnasium confrontation had been uploaded to various social media platforms, each showing clearly that Victoria had been the aggressor throughout the encounter, while Maya had consistently attempted to de-escalate the situation. The videos went viral within Westbridge Academy's social networks, sparking discussions about bullying, manipulation, and the difference between actual strength and performed dominance. Students who had been intimidated by Victoria for years began sharing their own stories of her psychological and social abuse, creating a cascade of revelations that transformed the school's understanding of its own social dynamics. Maya arrived home to find her father waiting with tea and a concerned expression. "How did it go?" Mr. Chen asked as Maya settled into her chair. Maya accepted the warm cup gratefully and took a moment to organize her thoughts. "She tried to set me up, attacked me while her friends recorded, hoping I would lose control and hurt her. And I remembered everything you taught me about choosing battles and controlling responses. She ended up looking foolish, while I looked calm and reasonable." Mr. Chen nodded approvingly, but his expression remained serious. "Victoria Sterling strikes me as someone who doesn't accept defeat gracefully. This may escalate before it resolves." Maya considered his warning while sipping her tea. "Maybe. But the difference is that now everyone has seen her true character. She can't hide behind fake charm and manipulated narratives anymore." That evening, Maya's phone buzzed constantly with messages from classmates she had never spoken to before. Some offered congratulations on her handling of the confrontation, others shared their own experiences with Victoria's bullying, and still others simply expressed relief that someone had finally stood up to Westbridge Academy's most feared student. Among the messages was one from David. "Thank you for being braver than the rest of us. See you tomorrow." Maya turned off her phone and sat with her father in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint their small apartment with golden light. The week had been exhausting and stressful, but she could feel something fundamental shifting in her relationship with Westbridge Academy and her fellow students. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked. Mr. Chen considered the question carefully. The immediate crisis is resolved, but the larger challenges of establishing yourself in a new community will continue. The difference is that now you're dealing with those challenges from a position of respect rather than isolation. Maya nodded, understanding that her confrontation with Victoria had been about more than just two teenagers settling a personal dispute. It had been about establishing principles and boundaries that would influence how she was treated for the remainder of her time at Westbridge Academy. The next morning brought a transformed social landscape to Westbridge Academy. Maya arrived to find that the previous evening's viral videos had fundamentally altered how students regarded both her and Victoria Sterling. Victoria's locker was surrounded by a small crowd of students, but instead of the usual sycophantic admirers, these were people with questions and accusations about her past behavior. Victoria herself looked pale and defensive, no longer moving through the hallways with her previous regal confidence. Maya's reception was equally different, but in the opposite direction. Students who had avoided eye contact with her just days before now offered friendly greetings and genuine smiles. Her locker area, previously a zone of isolation, had become a gathering spot for students who wanted to express gratitude for her role in exposing Victoria's manipulative tactics. David was waiting for her with an expression of amazement and relief. "Everything's changed," he said excitedly. "Victoria doesn't have any power anymore. People are actually standing up to her, telling her to leave them alone instead of just enduring whatever she dishes out." Maya organized her books while processing this information. The rapid transformation of Westbridge Academy's social dynamics was both gratifying and slightly overwhelming. "And how is she handling it?" Maya asked. David's expression grew more serious. "Not well. Rachel and Kate have distanced themselves from her, and the senior boys who used to hang around her table have found other places to sit. She's essentially alone now, and she doesn't seem to know how to handle it." Maya felt a pang of sympathy despite everything Victoria had put her through. The complete collapse of a social identity, even one built on manipulation and fear, was genuinely traumatic for the person experiencing it. During first period, Maya noticed that Victoria was absent from advanced literature. Mr. Davidson made no comment about her absence, but Maya could see other students exchanging meaningful glances as they processed the implications. At lunch, Maya's previously isolated table had become the unofficial gathering spot for students who wanted to discuss the previous week's events and their broader implications for Westbridge Academy's social culture. The conversations were surprisingly mature and thoughtful, focusing on creating more inclusive and supportive community dynamics rather than simply celebrating Victoria's downfall. "The weird thing," said Jessica, a quiet girl from Maya's chemistry class, "is that I never realized how much energy I was spending just trying to avoid Victoria's attention. Now that she's not a threat anymore, I feel like I can actually focus on school and friends and normal stuff." Several other students nodded in agreement, sharing similar experiences of the psychological toll Victoria's reign of intimidation had taken on the broader student body. Maya listened to these conversations with growing understanding of the larger impact her confrontation with Victoria had achieved. She had never intended to become a catalyst for community change, but her refusal to be intimidated had apparently given other students permission to examine and challenge the toxic dynamics they had previously accepted as inevitable. Victoria appeared briefly during lunch period, carrying a tray toward her usual central table, only to find it occupied by a group of sophomores who looked up at her with expressions of polite confusion rather than automatic deference. After a moment of awkward hesitation, Victoria retreated to an empty table near the windows, eating alone, while former admirers chatted animatedly at nearby tables without acknowledging her presence. Maya caught Victoria's eye across the cafeteria and was surprised by the expression she saw there. Instead of anger or resentment, Victoria looked lost and genuinely confused, as if she couldn't understand how her carefully constructed world had collapsed so completely in such a short time. After lunch, Maya was walking to her afternoon chemistry class when she heard rapid footsteps behind her. She turned to find Victoria approaching with an expression that was difficult to read, part desperation, part resignation, part something that might have been genuine remorse. "Can we talk?" Victoria asked quietly. Around them, students slowed their pace to observe this unexpected interaction, but Victoria seemed oblivious to the audience. "Please." Maya considered the request carefully. Victoria had lost her position of social power, but that didn't necessarily mean she had learned anything meaningful from the experience. On the other hand, refusing to acknowledge Victoria's apparent attempt at communication might perpetuate rather than resolve the underlying conflicts that had created their confrontation. "5 minutes," Maya said, privately. Victoria led her to an empty classroom, closing the door behind them before turning to face Maya with an expression of obvious internal struggle. "I don't understand what happened," Victoria began, her voice lacking its usual confident projection. "I've been the center of attention here since 7th grade. Everyone looked up to me, wanted to be my friend, cared about what I thought. And now..." She gestured helplessly, unable to articulate the completeness of her social collapse. Maya waited patiently, recognizing that Victoria was processing a fundamental challenge to her understanding of herself and her place in the world. "I know you think I'm just a bully," Victoria continued, "but it wasn't like that. I was popular, people liked me, I was just maintaining order, making sure everyone knew their place so there wouldn't be chaos." Maya studied Victoria's face, looking for signs of genuine self-reflection versus continued self-justification. What she saw was complicated, a mixture of confusion, hurt, and the beginning of what might eventually become actual understanding. "Victoria," Maya said gently, "people didn't look up to you because they admired you. They deferred to you because they were afraid of what you would do to them if they didn't." Victoria's face crumpled slightly, as if Maya's words had struck at something she had been trying not to acknowledge. "But I never actually hurt anyone," Victoria protested weakly. "Not really. I never hit anybody or..." "You researched my family's background to use against me," Maya interrupted. "You spread lies about my past to isolate me from potential friends. You threatened to hurt David to manipulate my behavior. You tried to orchestrate a situation where I would be provoked into violence while being recorded by hidden cameras." Maya paused, letting the list of behaviors sink in. "Those are all forms of harm, even if they don't leave visible bruises." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at the floor while processing Maya's words. When she finally looked up, her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I don't know how to be anything else," she said quietly. "This is who I've always been at Westbridge. Without that, I don't know who I am." Maya felt her anger toward Victoria beginning to transform into something more complicated, not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of shared humanity. Victoria's cruelty had grown out of insecurity and fear rather than inherent evil, which didn't excuse her behavior, but did suggest the possibility of change. "Maybe that's an opportunity," Maya said carefully, "to discover who you are when you're not performing a role or maintaining an image." Victoria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her carefully applied makeup. "Do you think... Is there any way people could ever forgive me for the things I've done?" Maya considered the question seriously. Victoria had caused real harm to many students over several years, and trust, once broken, was difficult to rebuild. But Maya had also seen how quickly social dynamics could shift when people were given permission to change their behavior. "I think it's possible," Maya said eventually, but it would require genuine change, not just apology. And it would take time, probably a lot of time, to prove that the change was real. Victoria nodded, seeming to understand the magnitude of the challenge ahead of her. Could you help me? Victoria asked hesitantly. I know I have no right to ask, especially after everything I've put you through, but you're the only person who never seemed afraid of me, and I think that might be what I need. Someone who won't let me fall back into old patterns just because it's easier. Maya was surprised by the request and the apparent sincerity behind it. Helping Victoria rebuild herself as a better person would be challenging and potentially frustrating work, with no guarantee of success. On the other hand, the alternative was leaving Victoria to figure things out on her own, which could result in either genuine growth or a slide into bitterness and resentment. I can't fix you, Maya said finally, but I can be honest with you about when you're falling back into manipulative behavior, if that's what you're asking for. Victoria's smile was tentative but genuine. That's exactly what I'm asking for. They returned to the hallway as the warning bell for next period began to ring. Around them, students moved through their afternoon routine, but Maya noticed that many of the interactions seemed more relaxed and genuine than they had during her first week at Westbridge Academy. The change wasn't universal. Social systems built on fear and intimidation didn't transform overnight. But there was a palpable sense that students felt more free to be themselves rather than constantly monitoring their behavior to avoid unwanted attention from the school's former queen. Over the following weeks, Maya watched Victoria struggle with the challenge of rebuilding her identity and social relationships from scratch. It wasn't an easy process. Years of manipulative behavior had left Victoria with few genuine relationship skills, and many students were understandably skeptical of her apparent transformation. But gradually, through small acts of consideration and genuine apology, Victoria began to demonstrate that her change was real rather than performative. She started tutoring younger students in subjects where she excelled, volunteered for community service projects that received no public recognition, and most importantly, learned to listen to others rather than dominating every conversation. Maya found herself in the unexpected role of unofficial mentor, helping Victoria recognize when she was slipping back into old patterns of behavior while also encouraging her genuine efforts at growth. It wasn't always easy. Victoria's years of social dominance had left her with habits and assumptions that were difficult to change. But Maya could see authentic progress. David emerged as one of Victoria's most surprising supporters, recognizing in her struggle something of his own journey from fear toward confidence. His willingness to forgive Victoria's past treatment of him provided a powerful example for other students who were wrestling with their own feelings about whether people could truly change. Westbridge Academy's social culture continued to evolve throughout Maya's first semester. The removal of Victoria's intimidation-based hierarchy had created space for more diverse forms of leadership and social organization. Students who had previously remained invisible began to emerge as voices for positive change, organizing events and initiatives that brought the community together rather than dividing it into rigid status categories. Maya's own role in these changes remained deliberately understated. She had never wanted to be the center of attention or to replace Victoria as a different kind of social ruler. Instead, she focused on her studies and her growing friendships with students like David and Jessica, content to be part of a healthier community rather than leading it. As winter approached and Maya's first semester at Westbridge Academy drew to a close, she reflected on how much had changed since that initial confrontation in the hallway. Victoria had evolved from a cruel tormentor into something approaching a friend. David had grown from a frightened victim into a confident advocate for other struggling students, and the school as a whole had begun to embrace values of inclusion and mutual support rather than competition and fear. The transformation hadn't been perfect or complete. Real change never was, but it had been genuine and lasting. Maya had learned that true strength wasn't about the ability to defeat opponents, but about the wisdom to know when confrontation was necessary and the skill to handle it with discipline and purpose. Most importantly, she had discovered that the lessons her father had taught her about control and inner peace weren't just about personal development. They were tools for creating positive change in whatever community she found herself part of. As she packed her books at the end of another school day, Maya caught sight of Victoria, helping a younger student with homework at a nearby table, patiently explaining a difficult concept with none of her former condescension or impatience. The sight filled Maya with quiet satisfaction, not because she had changed Victoria, but because Victoria had chosen to change herself. Walking home through the crisp December air, Maya understood that her journey at Westbridge Academy had been about more than just surviving high school social politics. It had been about learning how to use her strength, both physical and emotional, in service of something larger than herself. Her father was waiting at home with tea and an expectant expression, ready to hear about another day in the ongoing story of Westbridge Academy's transformation. "How are things today?" Mr. Chen asked as Maya settled into her familiar chair. Maya accepted the warm cup and considered the question thoughtfully. "Better," she said simply. "Different, but better." Mr. Chen nodded, understanding in his quiet way that some victories were measured not in dramatic confrontations, but in the gradual accumulation of small, positive changes that eventually transformed entire communities. Outside their window, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering Westbridge Academy and the surrounding city in a blanket of pristine white that seemed to symbolize the possibility of fresh starts and second chances for everyone willing to embrace them.